Hey guys, good morning. Welcome back to my garden. My name is Kira. Feel free to call me Q if you're new here. And if you're not new, welcome back. So what we're doing today is we are trellising up all of our tomatoes. So I'm going to show you the 3 different methods that we have here for trellising up our tomatoes. And we basically use so many different methods just because we're growing them in different areas in our garden. Now, if you have a bigger garden or if your garden is oriented a certain way, you might not need more than one. You might have your tried and true way that you like best in your garden. We use multiples, one because I like to switch it up and test out and see what works best for us, but also because of the orientation of our garden. So for us, for example, there are some trellising methods that work really well, but because of the way the sun goes over our garden, they would shade out a lot of different plants. And so we've kind of been a little bit creative in where we put tomatoes in our garden so that they're not taking the light from other plants as much. And so I'm going to show you just kind of like a few different methods that I really like to use that maybe you'll like to use in your garden also. So we're going to do 3 different methods. We're going to do just going on a cattle panel and growing tomatoes that way, which is actually fairly new to me. And then we're going to try what's called the Florida weave. And then we are going to do a suspended string trellis, which I got from, I think his name is Josh Satin. He has a great YouTube tutorial called Trellis to Make You Jealous. And that's where I got the 3rd method from. So the first one we're going to do is just trellising them up a cattle panel. This one I got from Jess at Roots and Refuge Farm. And so I'm going to show you kind of like how we're doing that this year. Again, it's something that we've never fully done before. And so I'm going to show you just like my thought process and how I'm going about it. So before we start, I just want to show you kind of what this looks like. So what we have here, we have 3 T-posts right here holding up a 4 by 16 foot cattle panel, and it is raised about 2 feet off the ground there. And that's because we have some indeterminate tomatoes here, which will grow a lot taller. And so we wanted to just give them more space. So this will give you an idea of what this trellis looks like. It's really easy and really simple. As far as putting it up, you probably do need 2 people. It can be a little difficult. It'd be great if you had 3 people or something to kind of like prop up one end if you're suspending it. Maybe something like a couple blocks to put underneath it or pieces of wood or something like that so that you can hold up one end and tie the other. And then we have this tied right now with zip ties, but in the future what we're going to do too is we're going to put some wire on this just to make it a little bit stronger because these zip ties are a little smaller than the ones we've used in the past. So to start off with these tomatoes, right here we have a Roma tomato, which is a determinate variety, which means it's going to grow to a predetermined height essentially. And so this specific variety gets about 4 to 6 feet tall. And so this is already 2 feet off the ground. And with these, because it's more of a bush variety, you do prune it differently than you do for the indeterminates. And so I wanted to start here because if you have bush varieties, from what I've learned, it's the one that requires the least amount of work essentially. And so all I'm going to do for my determinate tomatoes on this panel is I'm just gonna clip some of these leaves off the bottom that are touching the ground, and I'll bring you in so you can see what that looks like. So here's a close-up of this plant. You can see that it's branching out pretty well here, and it has what is called suckers. And for indeterminate varieties, you do want to prune all of those off or most of them off. But for determinate varieties, because it's a bush, I'm going to leave those. And all I'm going to do here is take the leaves off the bottom here that are touching the ground. And I'm going to do that as it grows up. And then I'm basically going to cut to the point where there are the first flowers as the plant grows. So I'm not going to take everything off of this today, but just as this plant grows, I'll eventually be taking all of this. and this one is touching the ground, but I might want to leave a couple leaves, and so maybe I can trim it here if I want to, which I've done before, or I can go all the way to the top. And I'll just go right here. Okay, there you go. So all I'm looking to do here is just clean the plant up a little bit at the bottom. And I'll take this guy too. All right, so now the bottom of this plant is clean. There's no leaves touching the ground. It lessens the chance of the plants getting splashback and getting kind of like funguses and stuff for when we water it or when it rains. And it's just going to overall be a healthier plant. See, this guy is close to touching the ground, so I'll clip a little bit of that too. All right, so that was it. That was super easy. So for the determinates growing on this panel, now what I'm gonna do is, as this plant gets bigger, all I'm gonna do is tuck it into the cattle panel and just weave it through and weave the branches through as it gets taller. So it's not quite tall enough yet, it's just barely reaching the first panel. But in a couple weeks here, it'll probably be tall enough and I'll be able to start using the panel to support it. Another thing I like to do is I like to actually tie the tomato plant to the panel as it gets bigger also, just to give it some more support. So I'll come in here with a little bit of twine and tie it and just kind of help train it to the panel. So I'm going to continue and do that with the other determinants that we have down here, and then I will show you what we do with the indeterminates on this kind of panel next. Okay, I'm back on the back side of this trellis. The next plants we have up here are Super Sweet 100 cherry tomatoes, and they're indeterminate. So that means they will go on forever until either the plant gets sick or the season is over for them. So basically it gets too cold for the plant to continue growing. So these we do prune a different way. Normally what you will do here is you'll do that same process where you clean up the bottom of the plant, and then these will get really tall. So I've had these plants get 8-9 feet tall, and then they would have gotten taller than that, but I clipped the top of them so they actually wouldn't grow any taller, just because at a certain point they're really hard to manage. And so then we would get more fruit on the main part of the plant. These are great. I love these. The other thing I forgot to mention is usually with determinate varieties, so like your Romas and things like that, they will put on all their fruit and it'll ripen all at once. Indeterminates will kind of just keep giving you a succession of fruit over and over and over again. So if you're doing something like a canning project, having determinants might be really great if you want to get all your tomatoes all at once, harvest them all at once, and process them all at once. But if you happen to be growing indeterminates, one of the workarounds for that is you can actually pick them when they're ripe and then freeze them, and then when you have enough of whatever variety that you want to make, like sauce or salsa or whatever you're trying to can, when you have enough of that variety, then you can thaw them and then just process them then. So that's a really cool tip. But what we're going to be doing here is, first I'm going to do the exact same thing as I did before, is I'm going to clean up the bottom of this plant, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do next. So now that I've cleaned the branches off the bottom for the most part that are touching the ground, the next thing I'm going to do is prune off the suckers. With a tomato plant, they'll usually have one main stalk, so that looks like it's this one here, and then there are leaves that branch or stems that branch off of it. Usually they start at 90-degree angles, and then like this one they might reach up a little bit. So if you go to the main stalk here, and then you see this 90-degree angle branch here, the thing that's growing in kind of the armpit, that's a sucker. And this is going to create basically a whole new plant on this plant. So it'll have its own stems, its own flowers, and everything like that. And with indeterminate varieties, sometimes you don't want all of those to stay because it'll make the plant really dense, really heavy, and it'll essentially have way more foliage to focus on than fruit. And so what I like to do is I will cut off all of these suckers. And when they're really small like this, you can come out here and just pinch it off like that. When they're a little bit bigger, I try to actually clip them. So come in with pruners, especially if it's a pretty good size. That one's still kind of small. I could have broken that off with my hand, but just to show you how I do it. And then as I just kind of like keep going. So there's another one back here that's growing in the armpit. I'm going to take that off. This one's a little guy, so I'm going to do it with my hands. And you just kind of continue from there. Now, what a lot of people will do too is if you want to do kind of what's a double leader is what it's called, you can strategically leave one of the suckers so that this plant will then develop two different stalks. And so instead of just having the one main stalk with fruit coming off of it, you'll double up. And that's a really good method because it doesn't require a ton more space as far as your trellis, but you get more fruit. What I'm going to do for right now is I'm going to leave this sucker right here. I'm going to leave it on so that I can try out doing a secondary leader. I've never done it before, but I've seen it done a lot and it seems fairly simple. As this grows, I'm going to take off all the other suckers, and then as this sucker grows and becomes a secondary stem, it's going to produce suckers of its own also, which I'm going to prune off. So that's about all I'm doing for this plant right now. And then again, once it gets tall enough to actually reach this trellis, I might prune off some more of the branches down here. And then what I'll do is I'll tie it to the trellis up here, and then I'll start weaving the branches throughout the trellis. The rest of this row of tomatoes are all indeterminate varieties, and so I'm going to go ahead and prune those the exact same way that I pruned this one. So now we're in front of our second cattle panel trellis. This cattle panel has all Roma tomatoes on it, so all determinate varieties, which again are going to get to be about 4 to 6 feet tall. And so on this one, we actually put the cattle panel directly on the ground. One, because we were having trouble getting this one up, and we don't actually need a ton of the extra height. If the plants go, you know, a foot to 2 feet over this cattle panel, that's totally okay. It's still really manageable because most of the bulk of the plants will be on the main part of the panel. And so since these are determinate, all I'm going to do here is trim the bottoms like we did for that very first one. And then some of these are long enough where I can start weaving some branches through, but some of them are still growing a little bit, and so that's just something I'm going to do as the season goes on. So let me clip these really quick. So now we've done our 2 cattle panel tomato trellises. The next thing we're going to do is trellis these tomatoes here that are between these 2 T-posts. And for this one, we're going to do the Florida weave method. Now, the reason that we're doing this method here, last year, we didn't have the 2 cattle panel areas that I just showed you. We only had a couple of our beds built. And so this was a way for us to put tomatoes in the beds without them blocking the sun for all the other plants. This direction is south for us, and west is this way, north is behind me. And so what we wanted to do so that they wouldn't shade everything out is have them kind of north facing. And so this was the best place to put them, just on the ends of these beds. Now, what that meant is we couldn't have as many tomatoes in a bed because we are only able to use this 4-foot space. What we decided to do was, last year we actually did the suspension string on these, but I found out that it just doesn't work as well for determinate varieties as I wanted it to. And so this year we're going to try Florida weave. I've never done the Florida weave before, but I've seen people do it. It seems pretty straightforward. These are determinate varieties. These are Romas, I believe. Yeah, these are all Romas, just like the ones we did. You can see that they're significantly bigger, which is awesome. But all I'm going to do is clean up the bottoms of these just like I did with the other ones. And then I'm going to take some twine. You can use string, whatever you have. And what you do is you make a loop around one of the T-posts that you have, and then you weave it through the tomatoes individually, and then you get to the other T-post, tie it around in a loop, and then weave it back through. And you just keep doing that as the plants grow. Now with this, I've seen people do kind of like a few weaves at a time and tie them off. I've also seen people just put all of their weaves up, kind of like wind the plants in as the plants grow. I think for me, mostly for aesthetic reasons, I'm probably just gonna tie as I go. It seems pretty easy. It's only 3 plants. It's not a huge project. And so I'm gonna do that for this bed here. And then we have 3 more tomatoes behind me. Same deal. That's it. That's the Florida weave. So you can see in here, I have the places where I went around the T-posts and wove just in and out of each plant so that they're kind of supporting each other. You can kind of see the string here, and here, and here. But yeah, you just weave in and out. Really simple. And so I'm going to repeat the same thing on this trellis right here. So the last kind of trellis method that we use is the string suspension. And so what we are going to do here is I have my tomatoes down here. They're kind of in a window pattern. They're not planted in a row, so that I could just have a little bit more room per plant. And then what I did just now is these T-posts here are 8 feet tall. Yours don't have to be that tall. This is just what we got. But what we did is I put 2 PVC tees here, and then there's just electrical conduit pipe in the middle. Again, I learned that from the Trellis to Make You Jealous video, which I'll link down below. It's Joshua Satin, because that's where we got this whole thing from, and we've used it 3 years now, and we really, really love it for indeterminate, really tall varieties. And so what I did at the bottom of the tomatoes just now is I put a landscape staple next to each plant. Some people do the landscape staple to tie the string to the staple. Other people will tie directly to their plants. Some people use clips, all sorts of things. There's lots of things that you can do. To make this simple, we use what we have, and so I really like the landscape staple method just because I'm not tying a knot directly to my plants, and so it allows the bottom of the stalk to just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and I don't have to worry about suffocating the plant. And what I'll do is I will just string a long piece of twine from the base of the plant over the electrical conduit pipe and then back down. And as the plant grows, all I do is just wrap the plant around the twine. And so I'll show you how I do that too. The one thing that we've adjusted for this method is just how we tie the string. We like to tie it in a way so that you can easily loosen the string and then retie it again as the plant grows, or as it gets too tight, as it starts, if you want to do like a lower and lean method to have your plants a little bit longer, all that kind of stuff. So we do a certain kind of knot that has a quick release, and I'll show you how we do that too. But other than that, everything from this method is from that Trellis to Make You Jealous video, and we really like it. So let me go ahead and string up the twine, and then we'll do the knot from there. Now, the last set of tomatoes we have are these ones that I'm growing actually on the inside of an arch trellis. And so I'm going to use the exact same string suspension method. It's just I'm going to go to the inside of this arch instead of it going to a pole or anything like that, but everything is the exact same because these are ones that I got from the farmer's market. And so I bought them bigger than all of the starts that I had. So I'm going to trellis these up. They're going to need a little bit more care just to straighten them out a little bit because they flopped over. And then they're going to require a little bit more pruning too. And that's it. So we have all of our tomatoes on some sort of trellis system, except for I have 3 more little guys over here that I'm waiting for them to get a little bit bigger before I trellis them up. But they'll be trellised the exact same way as these last ones we did, with the suspension string on this side of this arch. Again, you might not need all of these different types of trellising systems in your garden. You might not want to do all of them, but I think it's a good idea to at least try a few different ones and see what works best for you. See what works best for you know, the amount of time and effort you want to put in, the amount of inputs and resources that you want to put into them. For example, when we bought these cattle panels, it was last year and it was a little bit cheaper than they are now. So there's things like that. Maybe you want to look into the cattle panels. Maybe you have them anyway. They're cheap in your area. Maybe the string and PVC tees and electrical conduit pipe is cheaper in your area. I think it's cool that there's so many different ways that you can try it. Then it's just down to whatever works best for you and your garden and what you like. So I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, leave them down below. If you have other ways that you trellis your tomatoes that you really like, I would love for you to share those in the comments so that other people can read them too, and we can all just try different things. So I'm gonna clean up now. I have tomato tar all over one of my hands. This was my main hand that I was using to pick up leaves. And it's been a season since I did this, but I think vinegar just takes it off. It doesn't really come off very well with soap and water. You have to scrub a lot, but I think vinegar does the trick. But yeah, I'm gonna go wash my hands now because this is, I have alien fingers now. But thanks for hanging out with me today in my garden, and I will see you next time. Bye.